Hey, what is going on, everybody? Welcome into this week's edition of my top waiver wire targets and streamable defenses for Week 16 of this NFL season, the semifinals before the championship week. So, obviously, if you're watching this, that means you won your first round or you had a first round bye and you might be looking for some help heading into the weekend. That being said, I'm going to dive right into my video, starting with my waiver wire targets. As I've done all season, these waiver wire targets, they do have to have 50% roster availability, so there's a good chance they're available in your leagues. And as I said last week, as a reminder, I'm a firm believer once you get to the playoffs, just play the guys that got you here. But unfortunately, there were a number of injuries across the NFL this past weekend, so you might be needing help and there might not be a lot of great options. So you might have to turn to some of these names, and a couple of these names I actually mentioned last week in my waiver wire video. So maybe you picked them up and you already have them on your bench. That being said, starting with quarterback, as I always do, my top quarterback out of the week, I suggested him last week, and I do like him again this week. The veteran for New York, Aaron Rodgers. He's available in 65% of the leagues. This past weekend, he had 289 yards and 3 touchdowns. Surprisingly, he had 6 rushes for 45 yards. I believe, if I remember the stat right, because they looked into it today on the Pat McAfee show, that is the most rushing yards Aaron Rodgers has had in a game since I believe the 2019 season. So he's the most healthiest he's been all season long. He's thrown for at least 289 yards in the last 2 games. And he has a solid matchup this week. He is going against the Rams defense, who's allowed the 9th most points per game against the quarterback position. Now, am I saying pick up Aaron Rodgers and play him for over the quarterback that got you there? No. But, we'll have to see if Patrick Mahomes is available or not Saturday. He did register a full practice today. But say Patrick Mahomes, is ruled out, they're not going to play him on Saturday. And there's not a lot of great options out there for you. I don't think Aaron Rodgers is a bad option to turn to because I do think he and Devontae, I think, are trying to put on a show to either try to stay there in New York or for a potential new team to sign the both of them next season. Moving into my running back ad of the week, this one's pretty straightforward. Jerome Ford for the Browns. He's available in 56% of the leagues. Unfortunately for Nick Chubb, he broke his foot this past weekend, so he's done for the year. So that means Jerome Ford is going to lead the Cleveland backfield in touches over these next 2 weeks. So if you had a David Montgomery and you lost him, Jerome Ford is not a bad option to turn to because he should be getting the ideal volume of touches. This past weekend, he had 7 rushes for 84 yards and a touchdown. He also had 2 receptions for 20 yards on 2 targets. And they are going against the Bengals. They're about middle of the pack as far as points per game against the running back position. But why I also like Jerome Ford is they are going to they are benching Jameis Winston for Dorian Thompson-Robinson as their quarterback. So in my opinion, that means I think they're going to they're not going to put this game on Thompson Robinson's shoulders to win it through the air. I think they're going to heavily lean into the rushing attack, which should raise his value for this weekend. So if you are looking for running back help, that's a name to consider. My wide receiver ad, I mentioned him as my wide receiver ad last week, the rookie wide receiver for the Bucks, Jalen McMillan. He's available in 91% of the leagues this past weekend. He had 5 receptions for 75 yards and a touchdown. He had on 6 targets. He's gotten at least 6+ targets in his last 2 games, and he scored 3 touchdowns in his last 2 games. And he does have a decent matchup if you are desperate to start a wide receiver off the waivers. They are going against the Cowboys, who have allowed the 8th most points per game against the wide receiver position. But like I was saying, now I hope nothing happens to Mike Evans. Mike Evans is, I think, 280, something like 200 to 300 yards away from getting to 1,000 yards for, the 11th season in a row. I wanted to see him do that. But if you are a Mike Evans manager, I would just, if you don't have a solid wide receiver depth, maybe you just pick up McMillan just in case something were to happen to Mike Evans this weekend and you don't want to fight for like a McMillan next week on the waivers for the championship game. My tight end out of the week, this is a sneaky streaming option. You might not recognize this name. He's the backup tight end for the Jaguars. Brenton Strange, no surprise, he's available in 98% of the leagues. I'm not I'm kind of actually more surprised that he is not available in 100% of the leagues as a backup tight end for the Jaguars. But there are Jaguar fans out there. If you guys are not unaware, Evan Ingram is done for the season. I believe he tore his labrum. This past weekend, Brenton Strange caught 11 balls for 73 yards on 12 targets. My ideal range for tight ends are 7 to 9 targets. The fact that he saw double-digit targets is definitely ideal. And the reason why I think that happened is because Mac Jones is the quarterback. So Mac Jones, whenever he does get practice reps, he's practicing with his fellow backups, right? When he's running that scout team for the Jaguars all season when Trevor Lawrence was healthy, he's throwing to Brenton Strange. So he's very comfortable throwing the ball to him, which shouldn't come up as a surprise that he heavily targeted a guy he probably did a lot of practice reps with throughout the season. And why I say he's a sneaky streaming option is because they are facing the Raiders this weekend, and the Raiders have allowed the third most points per game against tight ends this season. My flex ad of the week, this is more of being a safe handcuff ad. You can maybe sneakily slide him into your flex if you're desperate off the waivers, but Tajay Spears, he's available in 56% of the leagues. Past weekend, he only ran the ball 4 times for 5 yards. He still scored a touchdown on the ground, but then he also had 6 receptions for 87 yards and a touchdown on 7 total targets. This is mainly for the Tony Pollard managers out there. If you are a Tony Pollard manager, I would just definitely suggest adding Spears, just because what if Pollard were to get hurt this weekend? You win your fantasy matchup, you go to the championship game, but one of your running backs that gotten you here is now on the sidelines because of an injury. Then you don't have to go fight for Spears next week off the waiver wires. And then, like I said, he's kind of a sneaky flex play because he is going against the Colts, who have allowed the 8th most points per game against the running back position. Before I move into the streamable defenses, one last thing I forgot to mention too. Now that we are at this point of the playoffs too, even if you don't need a guy, you can kind of mess with your opponent, right? So say your opponent lost a David Montgomery. You don't really need it. You say maybe you have 2 tight ends or maybe 2 quarterbacks, right? In my opinion, you don't really need 2 tight ends or 2 quarterbacks on your roster at this point. You should have one of them you're gonna trust in your lineup going forward. But your opponent this week is gonna miss a David Montgomery. Maybe you go add Jerome Ford for the heck of it, so you don't have to face Jerome Ford this weekend. I think if you want to be cutthroat like that, you can consider that when you're looking at the waivers. So yeah, those are my waiver wire targets. Moving into my streamable defenses. My number 1 streaming defense of the week, before I move in, these defenses, they do have to have 50% roster availability, so there's a good chance they're available in your league. There's actually a lot of decent streaming options, but I came up with these as my top 5. My number 1, the Bengals against the Browns. The Bengals are available in 61% of the leagues right now. This is a home game for Cincinnati. As I mentioned, why I do like it is they are benching. Well, maybe I don't like it because they're benching Jameis, right? Because Jameis does turn the ball over. But regardless, they're going to their 3rd string quarterback that they entered the season with, Dorian Thompson-Robinson. So I do like that. They're going against a younger quarterback who is making maybe his 3rd start. I can't remember how many starts maybe he did get last year as a rookie. And then some stats that why I like it. The Browns are tied for the most sacks allowed, so there's that sack potential. They have the 3rd most giveaways in the NFL, so there's that turnover potential that can put points on the board. And what also raises the floor a bit is they are only scoring 17.1 points per game this season, which is the 3rd fewest in the NFL. And then maybe there's a chance you can stream them next week if you couldn't find a better option. They do play the Broncos next week. I know the Broncos, they're going to be going to the playoffs, but it's not like their offense has been lighting the world up. I believe Bo Nix has thrown 5 interceptions over the last 2 weeks. So if he continues this interception trend tomorrow on Thursday night against the Chargers, maybe there's a chance you can consider the Bengals next week if there aren't a better option out there for you if you decide to stream Cincinnati this weekend. My other one, they're still available out there. I suggested them last week because you could carry them over into this week. But I do like the Falcons against the Giants. The Falcons are available in 62% of the leagues right now. This is a home game for Atlanta. Obviously, the Giants, I don't know if it's going to be Tim Boyle. I don't know if it's going to be Drew Lock or what's that kid's Tommy Cutlets. If it's going to be one of those three quarterbacks, but regardless, if it's one of those three quarterbacks, I like the potential where the defense can take advantage of the matchup. Some stats as well I like why on it as well is the Giants are tied for the fourth most sacks allowed, so there's some sack potential in this matchup. And what raises their floor as a streaming defense as well is the Giants are only averaging 14.9 points per game this season, which is easily the fewest in the league entering this weekend. My number 3 streaming option, I'm going to go with the Colts against the Titans. The Colts are available in 78% of the leagues right now. This is a home game for the Colts. It's not official, but there was a report that came out today that it sounds like they will be benching Will Levis, which kind of like Jameis, it's not ideal for your streaming option because both those quarterbacks do tend to turn the ball over. It'll likely be Mason Rudolph, but maybe he's more safer with the ball, but it's not like Mason Rudolph is known for putting up points. And then some stats why I definitely like it is the Titans are tied for the third most sacks allowed in the NFL, so there's that sack potential. The Titans actually have the most giveaways in the NFL, so there's that turnover potential, which can lead to maybe some touchdowns if you stream the Colts. And then why I really actually do like if you decide to stream the Indianapolis defense this weekend is because in the next week, in the championship week, they'll be playing the Giants. So I think you could stream the Colts against the Titans this week, win your matchup, get to the championship game, and just keep them as your streaming option against the Giants in week 17. My number 4 streaming defense is definitely a high risk, high reward because we don't ever know what we're going to get from this Jaguars defense, but they do have a good matchup. The Jaguars are going against the Raiders. The Jaguars are available in 92% of the leagues. We'll see if Aiden O'Connell can make it back. If he cannot make it back, it'll be Desmond Ridder as the quarterback. I'm going to be honest, I'm not worried about whoever is at the quarterback position for the Raiders. I still think it's a decent offense. I mean, it's a good option to stream against in the fantasy realm. And then you look at some of the stats, why I like it. The Raiders, they're tied for the second most sacks allowed in the NFL, so there's that sack potential. They have the second most giveaways in the NFL, so there's that turnover potential, which can lead into touchdowns. And then what kind of gives them a higher floor as well is the Raiders are only scoring 17.5 points per game. So that is the fourth fewest in the NFL. And another thing too is Jaguars were not a bad option to stream against the Titans a couple weeks ago. The Jaguars actually end up beating the Titans in that game. Well, they do play the Titans again next week in week 17. So if you're to miss out on those 3 defenses and you wanted to roll the dice on the Jaguars against the Raiders this week and they come through for you, well, you can consider them next week in the championship game week against the Titans as well. My number 5 streaming defense. Now, this is with a asterisk, right? If Patrick Mahomes plays or not. Now, if he doesn't play, I really like this as an option because Carson Wentz will be the quarterback, and obviously we know Carson Wentz at this point. He's just like Jameis Winston or one of those quarterbacks that you like to stream against, right? He's prone to turn the ball over. Obviously, if Patrick plays, this isn't a great option, but what's a crazy stat I heard today is even with Patrick Mahomes, it might be a decent option because that Kansas City is one of 4 teams that have not scored 30 points in a game this season, which is wild to think about, with especially considering their record. And then what I like about it would be if you honestly, I would be very worried if I were to stream against Patrick. This is more of like if Carson Wentz is the quarterback for Kansas City on Saturday. But there are some nice stats with the Houston defense because they actually have the second most sacks in the NFL and they have the second most takeaways. So they are really good at getting after the quarterback and getting their hands on the ball and forcing turnovers, which gives them a higher ceiling as a streaming option this week. So yeah, those are my waiver wire targets and streamable defenses for the semifinals or week 16, wherever you want to call it. As always, guys, if you enjoyed the video, hit the like button. If you have not subscribed or followed me on all my social media platforms, please do. You can mainly find me on X. That's where I'm most definitely the most active, where you can get me to get replies back to. But of course, I'm on YouTube. I'm also on TikTok, and I am on Instagram as well. And I wish you guys a great night, morning, whenever you're watching this. You'll get me tomorrow night when I do my top starts and sits for this weekend. Peace out.